Now, Roxanne Wood was found lying in a pool of blood on her kitchen floor back in 1987. Two separate teams of investigators have looked into her case. Each came to the same conclusion, but there is still no justice for her family.
I lost a best friend, a lifelong best friend.
For 15 years, the Pinal County Sheriff's Office played a game of cat and mouse as they tried to pinpoint a killer. Oscar Tejeda Mejia was named the prime suspect in the murder of Arturo Martinez-Altamirano back in 2007. However, it would take years before an actual arrest could be made. On October 29, 2007, hunters stumbled upon the body of Arturo along West Grove Road in Stanfield, Arizona. They contacted the PCSO immediately, and investigators began an investigation into the murder of the 37-year-old man. There didn't seem to be a defined motive. However, there was DNA evidence and the name of a potential suspect, Oscar Tejeda Martinez. Witnesses claimed to have seen Arturo and Oscar together prior to the murder. His name was mentioned to police as a possible suspect. Despite knowing the identity of the alleged killer, police were already too late as Mejia slipped through the investigative cracks and disappeared, fleeing the country. The case grew cold as the years passed. In 2017, the Homicide Department reopened the cold case after learning that Mejia had been living in Mexico all along. The next year, a DNA sample was obtained from a person who was reportedly a close relative to the suspect. Through testing, detectives were able to positively match and link Mejia to the murder of Arturo. Working together, U.S. Marshals and Interpol located and arrested Mejia on January 12, 2022. Mejia, who was 59 years old at the time of his arrest, was a Mexican citizen. He was extradited to the U.S. and faces a first-degree murder charge. Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb said it was their duty to make sure violent criminals were not permitted to live freely while their victims' families suffered. "We are hopeful this will bring some peace to those who have waited so long for closure," he said. For 17 years, the mystery of Pertina Epps' murder baffled authorities until DNA evidence linked a popular schoolteacher to the crime. The 21-year-old mother of two was found strangled to death in an empty carport in Gardena, California. Her body was discovered by a resident of the apartment complex as they were backing out of the parking lot. She had just moved back from San Diego the day before, on April 25, 2005. Epps was alleged to have been a sex worker and was initially believed to be the victim of a serial killer. There was a fingerprint found on a purse belonging to Pertina, along with some DNA evidence. Yet neither yielded a match in police databases. Despite following up on tips and an extensive investigation into the murder, all leads were exhausted. That is, until the DNA evidence found at the crime scene was retested after Epps' case was reopened in 2021, revealing a completely new suspect. On January 27, 2022, police arrested Charles Wright, a 57-year-old math and history teacher at Monroe Middle School. His bail was set at $1 million. Following the arrest of Wright, County Administrator and head of Inglewood Unified School District, Erica F. Torres, announced to parents and staff that he would no longer be teaching at any of their schools. Wright resigned from teaching after 20 years in order to focus on fighting the case. He remained adamant about his innocence, claiming the fingerprint evidence that linked him to the murder was probably due to his sideline business of selling clothing and purses from his car. Wright told investigators that if they asked anyone, they would tell them he was known to sell items from his car during the time of Epps' murder. A student who wanted to remain anonymous said they didn't believe the charges against him were real. Mr. Wright is one of those teachers that keep it real with you and looks out for students, always encouraging us to take life and our studies seriously, said the student. However, shortly after posting bail, his DNA was linked to yet another sexual assault case in 2006, a year after Epps' murder. The victim was an 18-year-old woman known to be a sex worker in the Los Angeles area. He appeared in court on the first-degree murder charge with regard to the Epps case. He pleaded not guilty to the charges leveled against him in that case. Wright, though, was arrested once again, this time being charged with both cases, and his bail was revoked. Epps' mother, who has not been named, said she hoped that this time they found the right person. Investigators strongly believe that Wright may be responsible for other incidents and urge victims to come forward with more information. Contact details for relevant departments will be posted in the description box. It was a murder that shocked and shattered the innocence of Bedford, Massachusetts. When Raymond Scheublin returned home from work on June 10, 1971, his perfectly ordered life was torn apart. In the basement, he discovered the beaten and bloodied body of his wife, Natalie. Raymond immediately called police, and investigations began in earnest. Natalie Scheublin, a 54-year-old mother of 2 grown children, was found bludgeoned and stabbed to death. Her ankles were bound, a gag hanging around her neck, and her body lay face down in the basement of her Pine Hill Road home. Police initially looked at her husband Raymond, who was the president of Lexington Trust Bank. He was cleared as a suspect after providing a solid alibi. An autopsy revealed she had been stabbed fatally and beaten over the head with an unknown blunt object. At the crime scene, police recovered blood from a bathroom sink and lifted a partial fingerprint. Apart from Natalie's 1969 Chevy Impala, nothing of importance had been stolen. Only a paring knife and pry bar, which was likely used to beat Natalie, were missing from the home. The master bathroom was disturbed by the killer. The closet and several purses were rifled through, possibly in search of items of value. The car was later discovered in the parking lot of Bedford Veterans Administration Hospital. However, the interior had been wiped clean, leaving no evidence apart from a partial fingerprint. The violent death of the well-known and respected Natalie Scheublin sent shockwaves through the small community. One resident, Maureen Sullivan, remembered being a carefree 14-year-old at the time. The places they used to play all year round were suddenly off-limits. The investigation was long and drawn out, with police searching the woods behind the home. Hundreds of surveys were distributed among the community, with people being asked if they had seen anything unusual that afternoon. Recently released prisoners from the local jail and patients and staff from the local VA hospital were checked and cleared. This included 4 patients who escaped the hospital. All leads were exhausted by the end of the investigation, as none of them panned out. For years, the case went cold as police were unable to identify a suspect. Technological advancements would take years before finally delivering investigators a name. Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS, a technology used by the FBI, was used by state police to run the fingerprint lifted from the crime scene. In 1999, the police finally had a name: Arthur Louis Massey. He was someone the police wanted to look into regarding the case. Massey, though, proved a cunning foe. When investigators initially interviewed him, he denied knowing Natalie or anything about her murder. Eventually, he told investigators he'd been asked by an organized crime associate to murder the wife of a banker and make it look like a break-in. Massey claimed he turned down the offer. Police could not find any evidence to corroborate Massey's claims. Furthermore, they found no link between Massey and Raymond Scheublin, involving a plot to have Natalie murdered. During a 2005 follow-up interview with police, Massey shifted the blame onto one of his cousins. He alleged that he'd learned his cousin had carried out the murder. Speaking to police, Massey provided a detailed outline of how the murder had happened. Far from clearing his name, this revelation to more police scrutiny of Massey's story. Yet it was not enough to secure an arrest. The case again went cold, and would stay cold for the next 20 years. Meanwhile, Raymond Scheublin passed away, aged 92, in 2012, never knowing the truth behind his wife's murder. It was looking as though their children, Kenneth and Carol, too, may also go to their graves without answers. That's when Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan and the cold case unit refocused their efforts in the Scheublin case. Approaching the case from a new angle provided some much-needed clarification. Digging into Masai's past proved to be the pivotal point in turning the case in their favor. Investigators identified a woman who has not been named that admitted to being involved with Masai in schemes to defraud banks during the 1990s. She also revealed his weapon of choice. Masai habitually carried a knife and even bragged about killing someone with one. Further digging into his past revealed a lengthy criminal history. Masai had prior convictions for armed robbery, financial crimes, and assault and battery. For the prosecution team, this was enough to take to a grand jury. It was the link and corroboration they needed to back up the facts they already had. During the arraignment, prosecutor David Soleil argued that Masai showed a disdain and general disregard for the law and the justice system. They addressed Masai's long criminal history. These include prison sentences, assaults on correctional officers, and 2 prison escapes. As recently as 2016, Masai violated a court order for harassment and abuse. Soleil told the court that Masai would not abide by the court's orders and should therefore be held without bail. After half a century, a grand jury finally indicted Masai on the first-degree murder charge. He was 76 years old and living in Salem, Massachusetts at the time of his arrest on March 22, 2022. Masai's estranged daughter, Candace Morin, spoke out about her father's arrest. She had been born just weeks before the murder. According to Morin, she had not spoken to Masai since 1991. If it's true, it's absolutely disgusting, she said. She felt absolutely sorry for the family of Natalie and said it was shocking to hear that her father had committed such a brutal crime just 2 weeks before she was born. Natalie's children, who are now in their 70s, watched the arraignment remotely. He pleaded not guilty and is being held without bail. Bedford Police Chief Ken Fong hopes that the arrest provided some closure and a sense of justice for Natalie's family.
I'm hopeful that the arrest in this case today will provide some closure and sense of justice for Natalie Scheublin's family.
For 30 years, Noka Irvin was haunted by the memory of discovering her sister Helen's body at a YMCA room in Niles, Illinois. 35-year-old Helen Cardwell had been living at the YMCA after suffering a stroke a year earlier. She had moved from West Virginia to seek treatment and help. She was undergoing rehabilitation and was about to start her life anew when it was tragically snatched from her. It was November 7th, 1992. Helen was preparing to start a job at the Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge, sterilizing medical equipment. When Noka stopped by at the Leaning Tower YMCA to pay Helen a visit, she didn't expect the horror that was about to greet her. Helen was naked apart from a pair of white socks. She had been tied up and strangled with a sweater that was still around her mouth. It appeared she was sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. There was no sign of forced entry and nothing was stolen. Residents didn't notice anything unusual or suspicious the night before. There seemed to be no evidence of a visible struggle in the room. Niles police followed up on all clues and interviewed everyone in the YMCA building. What little evidence there was collected and bagged until further testing could be done to find Helen's killer. Helen Cardwell was struck down in the prime of her life before she could embark on a journey to start afresh with a new job. Her killer, it seemed, had got away with murder. For 3 decades, the case grew progressively cold. It was long enough for police to decide that Helen's family needed justice for her untimely death. In 2020, Niles Police Department reopened the investigation, and the cold case team took another look at the evidence collected. Technology had improved significantly since 1992, and the biological evidence found on Helen's body and the sweater were submitted to the national database, TIMECODES. In November 2021, there was a hit. It belonged to 72-year-old Richard Sisto. Sisto had no connection to Helen apart from the fact that he worked just blocks away from the Leaning Tower in Village Crossing. Police were further baffled as to how Sisto went undetected while attacking Helen at her YMCA room. Sisto, though, was no stranger to crime. Until 1992, he was incarcerated in Texas for a 1977 aggravated sexual assault case. During his time in prison, he was accused of sexually assaulting a female prison guard in 1984. He was released on parole in April 1992 and was working at the Towhee Avenue Jewel Osco store during the time when he attacked and murdered Helen Cardwell. When police made the link to Helen's murder through DNA evidence testing, police initially could not find Sisto. He was being held in Harris County, Texas, on a parole violation. When they finally tracked him down, he was interviewed and a DNA sample was taken. It proved to be a positive match. Sisto was extradited to Illinois to face murder charges in relation to the slaying of Helen Cardwell. He was held on a $1 million bond before being extradited back to Illinois. On November 23, 2021, Sisto was ordered by Judge Anthony Calabrese to be held without bond during his hearing at the Cook County Courthouse. Detective Mike Boba of the Niles Police Department said, "It was something that has been in their heads, and it was frustrating at the time." For Noka Irvin, the arrest comes with a great sense of relief, as her sister's killer was finally caught. "I'm so grateful they decided to reopen this case, and I just appreciate everyone's efforts in solving her murder," she said. At the time of his arrest, Sisto had been diagnosed with a heart condition. He ultimately passed away on January 26, 2022, while awaiting trial. Within half an hour of saying goodbye to his wife, Terry Wood's life changed forever when he discovered her body lying in a pool of her own blood in their kitchen. 31-year-old Roxanne Leigh Wood and her husband Terry lived together for 2.5 years on Tam O'Shanter Lane in Niles, Michigan. They did not have any children, but were making plans to start a family together. Roxanne worked in the customer service department at Automatic Molded Plastics in South Bend, Indiana. She was affectionately known as Rock to those closest to her. She adored tending to her rose bushes. Family and friends described her as outgoing and said she loved to laugh. On the night of February 19, 1987, Roxanne and Terry went out to the White's bowling lanes on 11th Street in Niles. She left the place at around 12:30 a.m., driving home alone. She and Terry had taken separate cars, and he left a little later. At 1 a.m., when Terry eventually arrived at their home, he discovered Roxanne covered in blood, throat slit. There were no signs of forced entry, save for the rear door that was left slightly ajar. Roxanne was dressed in her nightwear, an empty knife sheath laying next to her body. When police arrived and investigations began, it was deduced that Roxanne had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. A post-mortem revealed her throat had been slit after her death. Divers searched the nearby Brandywine Creek following Roxanne's murder, looking for the weapon, but nothing was found. The murder weapon was never recovered, but police believe that a fillet knife from the couple's own kitchen was used to kill Roxanne. Local newspaper, the South Bend Tribune, reported that Roxanne had been struck on the head with a frying pan found nearby. She was hit with such force that the handle had broken off the pan. Police first had to interview the spouse, Terry. In incidents such as this, the spouse is always considered a person of interest. DNA evidence collected from the scene included 2 vials of dried blood. In April of the same year, Terry Wood put up a reward for $15,000 to anyone who could provide information in identifying the killer. Unfortunately, this did not garner any fruitful leads, and the case grew colder as the years passed. Terry remained the state's prime suspect, despite his claim of innocence. These suspicions were fueled by the hiring of an attorney who advised Terry to exercise his right to remain silent in regard to Roxanne's case. Terry Wood lived under a cloud of suspicion, as there were no other leads in the case for nearly 14 years. In 2001, DNA taken from the scene was tested against samples given by Terry. The DNA found at the scene was not a match, and this left investigators with more questions than answers. Terry being cleared was both a relief and a new set of problems. Now it meant starting the investigation process from scratch. They began by interviewing over 200 people, but they were no closer to finding the killer in 2001 than they were in 1987. The DNA sample was entered into CODIS, but still no match was found. The case remained cold until criminal justice students from the Western Michigan University, under the guidance of Dr. Ashley Kirsten, Identifinders, and the Michigan State Police teamed up to find the killer. Students Ashley Scheublin and Carl Huber put in over 1,200 hours of their time in scanning and digitizing multiple boxes of evidence. The cold case program was spearheaded by Dr. Kirsten, and Roxanne's case was the first to be investigated by her team of students. The documents were made easily accessible and allowed detectives to browse through files and develop profiles using specific names, dates, and keywords. Using character recognition software, data was compiled to create profiles of potential persons of interest based on personal traits and characteristics. Armed with a character profile, detectives now needed a DNA profile. Identifinders tested the 2 dried blood samples to narrow down a genetic profile of the possible killer. They decided to try using genetic genealogy, a more modern and advanced method of testing DNA using genetic profiles from relatives of possible suspects. It was Gabriela Vargas, an investigative genetic genealogist who had been working as a consultant with Identifinders International, who ended up cracking the case. Literally, a case that took them 34 years to investigate took me 4 days to solve, she said proudly. It was a landmark discovery for DNA testing, as the decades-old sample was considered very low level and highly degraded, a nod toward the major strides made in technology in helping identify a killer that would have gotten away with a crime. Prior to Vargas handling the testing, 2 other genealogy agencies gave up on the case, calling it unsolvable. She started the process of DNA matching using family trees. Once she found the right family, it was the process of eliminating possible suspects. They found 3 possible matches. All 3 were brothers, and one of them was the man they were looking for, Patrick Wayne Gillum. Of the 3 brothers, Patrick was the only one who had a criminal history and lived near Roxanne at the time she was murdered. Detectives knew that Gillum was a smoker, and after some undercover work, were able to recover a cigarette butt and test for DNA match. The match was positive, and police prepared to make the arrest. Mere days before the 35th anniversary of Roxanne's death, police arrested Gillum, now 67 years old, on February 17, 2022 at his South Bend home in Indiana. Initially, details of his identity were not released to the public, as investigators waited for him to be arraigned on the charges. Authorities did reveal, however, that the killer had no connection to Roxanne. At a press conference held on February 18, 2022, Berrien County Prosecutor Steve Pierangeli announced the identity of Roxanne Lee Wood's killer as Patrick Wayne Gillum. Gillum was previously charged and arrested in Gary, Indiana, for breaking into a home and attacking Maureen Farag. She ultimately survived the attack, and Gillum was sentenced to 14 years in prison. He only served 7 years, half his original sentence, before brutally killing Roxanne just 6 months after his release. He lived just 4 miles away from Roxanne when the murder was committed. Maureen's husband, Robert Farag, supported the Woods family at Gillum's sentencing in April 2022. "I just hope he doesn't see the light of day. He doesn't deserve it," said Farag. For Roxanne's family, they were relieved to finally get some answers to the questions that had plagued them for 35 years. They characterized him as a predator whose actions have haunted their family for decades. Brad Wood, Roxanne's brother, never gave up on finding justice for his sister. During Gillum's sentencing, Roxanne's family were given a chance to speak. Wood said his voice would be heard if Gillum was ever released early for murdering Roxanne. "He is a monster and should never be allowed to walk the streets where my wife, my daughters, and my granddaughters walk free," he said. Roxanne's younger sister, Janet Wood, said that Gillum's action gave her entire family a life sentence, while he got to live life as a free man for far too long. By the grace of God and the right detectives and modern technology, he was found, and we are here today to see him finally pay something for what he's done, which is likely the rest of his life in a cage, like the violent animal that he is, she said. Gillum was allowed to address the family after they had their say in court. He expressed remorse for his actions and the devastation he caused for both the family of the victim and his own. "I'm very sorry. I can't believe I did what I did. I pray for them every night. I am so sorry. I just hope sometime in the future, with God's help, that they can forgive me. And to my family that I'm sorry I disgraced, I'm so sorry," said Gillum. In an interview with WBST-TV, Janet voiced her anger at what had happened to Roxanne. "I lost a best friend, a lifelong best friend," she stated.
I lost a best friend, a lifelong best friend.
During his sentencing, Gillum pleaded no contest to the charge of second-degree murder and was given a minimum sentence of 23 years. He will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, as he will be 90 before he serves his minimum sentence. With new technology and dedicated detective work, cold cases are finally being solved at an amazing rate. It takes dedication and hard work to find a killer. Cold case suspects are now finding the long rope of justice tightening steadily. If you haven't already subscribed to Mysterious Hook, please hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell to be the first to be notified about new videos like this one.